Okay, my clock says it's straight up 12 noon, and we will welcome everybody to the Fourth State Dairy Nutrition and Management Conference webinar series. It continues today with Dr. Wess Everman from Iowa State University, who'll be discussing the framework for the new herbicide strategy and how it will impact farmers and applicators. The Fourth State Dairy Nutrition and Management Conference presents the latest research on nutrition and management of dairy cattle and has expanded the conference impact on the industry with the webinar series. The conference and webinars are a collaborative effort of the University of Illinois Extension, Iowa State University Extension, University of Minnesota Extension, and the University of Wisconsin Extension. I ask that you please click on the evaluation in the chat box at the conclusion of the program. It's a short, uh, it's only a handful of questions, but your input helps us to improve future programs. The EPA's final herbicide strategy aimed at protecting over 900 endangered species will significantly alter dairy operations by introducing stricter, mandatory, and more complex pesticide application regulations. For dairy farms, which often rely on both crop production and pasture management, this strategy means a shift towards more restrictive weed control measures. Dr. Everman, assistant professor and extension weed science specialist, came to Iowa State University by way of North Carolina State University, where he spent the last 13 years as professor and extension weed specialist. While there, he conducted research and extension activities, finding economical solutions to the growing problem of herbicide resistance in weeds. As I always say, Dr. Everman, the podium is yours.
All right. Thanks, Fred. I appreciate the opportunity to chat about this. There's a lot of dynamic things going on with this herbicide strategy. There's an insecticide and fungicide strategy. There'll be others rolling out as well. But the herbicide strategy was first. And as we're going through this process, there's a lot of questions and a lot of concern, right? And so, what I want to say up front is, as I'm going along, if you have questions, I've got the chat pulled up. Raise your hand. I'll try to catch them and answer them as I go. I'm happy to do that. But I'll roll through and discuss, what is the strategy, what's going to be changing, and then some of the tools and tactics, some of the things we can do on our individual operations to, I guess, make this less painful is the way I would approach it. So first off, what is the herbicide strategy? I'm going to walk through and define the Endangered Species Act, how this ESA herbicide strategy will affect our herbicide use. Why are we hearing about it now? And then how will it affect the herbicides I use today and into the future? So just real quick, the Endangered Species Act, ESA, was first passed in the early 70s. So it's nothing new. This has been around for decades. It requires the government and its agencies to make sure any actions taken by them do not endanger any species, the environment. It doesn't jeopardize anything, right? And so they have to consult with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service. Okay. I'll refer to them as the services going forward, but it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service. The EPA, they're the agency that regulates our herbicides as well. Okay. Especially through the Office of Pesticide Programs. They do the labeling, they do the looking at, how these herbicides, but insecticides, fungicides, all of them, fit what it has been looked at, toxicity, use patterns, all of that. Since herbicides can affect plants and animals or their habitat, right? Pesticide regulations are considered actions. And remember that Endangered Species Act says any actions need to be evaluated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the National Marine Fisheries Service to determine if they could jeopardize any of our species and if there's any potential negative effects. So that's a requirement that's always been there. Well, several years ago, there was a lawsuit where a number of different groups sued the EPA, said, hey, they're not consulting with these services to make sure that these pesticides are safe and are doing no harm. Went to court, EPA admitted, they said, yeah, we don't have the resources. We've never done this. So the courts annulled all pesticide registrations and said, all right, well, you haven't done any of this. We're going to take them all away. The herbicide strategy and then the other strategies are in response to this. This was negotiated with the plaintiffs and the EPA in conjunction with the court. They said, all right, if you do these strategies, the herbicide strategy being one of them, and bring in all the herbicides and pesticides, bring them into compliance by bringing them through this strategy. We'll keep them registered. We won't annul any of them. And all new registrations have to go through this process to make sure there's no jeopardy. Okay. And then ultimately, in the long run, then protect them from litigation because now they'll all be in compliance. So these strategies were all developed. We're moving from registration decisions on a chemical specific basis to more pesticide groups, right? So this is where we see herbicide strategy, insecticide strategy, fungicides, etc. There are still some chemical specific decisions and assessments that are occurring, but these are due to ongoing litigation and ongoing reviews that were already in place prior to these being implemented. So, what is it and what does it do? Okay. Well, it identifies runoff and erosion mitigations, right? So that's one bucket, and spray drift mitigations. That's another bucket. So it's kind of two pieces. It gets talked about really all lumped together, but there's two primary aspects of this. Okay. So runoff erosion and spray drift mitigation, basically to protect our endangered species and their habitats, right? So they're going to look at every herbicide as it comes through registration and apply that strategy during that registration or re-registration process. So new products coming, we'll have to go through this. Anything that's on the market already, about every 10 to 15 years, we go through re-registrations. Those will all go through that new herbicide strategy as well. So even products we've had for 50, 60 years are going to have to go through the herbicide strategy to make sure they're safe and, have our mitigations, our runoff erosion and spray drift mitigations for each. Labels are going to change in a significant way. There's going to be more language on the runoff erosion and definitely some more restrictions, language, and I guess practices that we will have to implement for spray drift management. At the end of the day, it's trying to keep our pesticides, whether it's a herbicide or the others, on the field or on the property that we're spraying. To me, that doesn't sound crazy, right? Herbicides, any of the pesticides, they're not cheap, and we're trying to treat a given area anyhow. We don't want that running off or going off the field through water or through wind. So these make a lot of sense and hopefully would lead us towards better stewardship on drift management, especially. So, where do these come from? A lot of it has to do with the weather. The runoff and erosion mitigation is based on historical rainfall frequency and intensity data. So a lot of people wonder, where does this come from? They've looked at historical data and said, okay, these areas get heavy rainfall or really frequent rainfall. Those have a higher risk of runoff or erosion. Areas that don't have that rainfall component, they're less of a risk. We also have spray drift mitigation. This is going to be based on the estimated herbicide impact on natural and non-managed areas. So some products that have more concern are going to have greater restrictions on spray drift parameters. Again, these labels will change to give these restrictions really on a product by product basis. So what is going to change? You'll see 3 times in a row I said these labels will change. It's to get people thinking about looking at the labels, right? Um, I'm realistic. I work with a lot of farmers, practitioners. I don't know if most people look at labels every time they spray. I don't know if I know that some people have never looked at labels closely. That's going to have to change. We're going to have to start looking to see what these changes are because as we have changes, that means if there's a complaint or an investigation, right, the label's the law, what's on that label, we have to follow. If we're not following these mitigation strategies, those could be actionable offenses, from our governing agency or our inspecting agency. So I just want to, kind of beating a dead horse with this, but it's gonna be really important to be checking these. We also will have a requirement to check Bulletins Live too. It's a website where it tells us specific restrictions for products based on geography. And I'll walk through that here in a minute. We're going to have to do more spray drift mitigation. And then there's going to be a requirement to adopt practices to accumulate our mitigation points. So, what is Bulletins Live 2? It provides up to date Endangered Species Act restrictions. Okay. It has requirements for application restrictions based on specific herbicides and specific geographies. It gives us threatened or endangered species areas where we have pesticide use limitations. So, pesticide use limitation areas or PULAs are areas where we say, hey, with this herbicide, based on the endangered species present or their habitats, we have to put in extra precautions. So this is separate from the erosion runoff or the drift mitigations. Okay, this is could be more restrictive, and we have to follow these guidelines first and then go on with the others if there aren't any. So we can go, this is the website. This is being recorded, and Fred will have this shared. So if people need to pull it up, you can just Google Bulletins Live 2 and it'll pull right up. This is what it'll look like. So just to give an idea, I'm in Iowa. So this is all the PULAs in the state. So if I pulled up, a map, you can see the eastern third of Iowa is under PULAs, a little bit along the north, but actually, as of right now, there are none for any of our herbicides. These would be for other pesticides, but right now it's not for herbicides. But what we would do is go in, you'd search your location, you'd say when you're going to apply it. I did this a year ago, just said the date I was putting it in. But if we're applying in June or July, we put it down and then we'll pick the herbicide or the product here. Okay. So you pick your product. The only clunky thing about this is you have to do it product by product. Okay. So let's say last May, I was going to make an application of the new Liberty Ultra formulation. That's the first herbicide that went through this process. I picked it out of the list. What it tells me, there's two PULAs in the whole country. One's in uh, Tennessee, outside of Nashville, I believe, and the other's in Florida. Okay. But if this is my farm it would show up on this map. There are none here, right? And I can click on this up here where it says printable bulletin. And this is what we want to do. So we pull it up for our product, for our area, and it'll pull up this bulletin as a PDF, I believe. It'll tell us there are no use restrictions for our area that were selected on the map. If there were, they would be spelled out here in the table, and explain, extra buffers, different use patterns, maybe rates. There are some products that are not allowed in certain PULAs. So this would be the first step. In this case, we don't have any limitations. We could save this, put it in a file, and we're covered for the year. I think we have to do this. I believe it's 8 months or 9 months. Um, you have a window for collecting this. So if we did this in March, you'd be covered for the whole growing season. Typically, you just have to check back before you put in your next crop. So how is this going to affect our pesticides that we use? All right, we're going to have that requirement to check the bulletins live too. We should check our EPA mitigation menu, look for measures that reduce our spray drift, as well as reduce runoff or erosion. And then there will be other measures to reduce pesticide exposure to our listed species. So there's going to be some changes with that as well. The mitigation menu, again, this is one that's pretty easy to Google. EPA mitigation menu. This should pop right up. I was just looking at it this morning, and we have our items we can use. All right, do I even need to have runoff or erosion mitigation? You can click on that and go through a little quick checklist of if we even need to have it. And then there's also a menu on our options for runoff and erosion mitigation. Okay. Spray drift mitigation are going to be herbicide specific. They're going to be on the label and we have to follow those. So we'll get to that in a little bit, but here's the mitigation menu for the runoff erosion. As we go through, if you click on that, here's where you can get all your points for these runoff erosion mitigations. I'm not going to walk through all of them, but there are a bunch of options. EPA, and I know one of the guys that worked on this there, they basically said, you know what? We haven't had pesticides take out an endangered or threatened species since the EPA was created, since we're labeling herbicides. Farmers must be doing something right. And they gave a lot of credit to things that we already have in place and said, hey, grass strips, vegetative terraces, tiles, all these things are positives. And we get credit for a lot of these. Okay. So it's going to be when we sit down and do our mitigations, we're going to have to go field by field. Then that's a management area. So it's not going to be for your whole farm, but what you would do in one management practice, right? So if you manage a pasture or a hay field or a cornfield, that would be your management area, not across your whole farm. So we're going to have to do several of these for each operation, for each product that we use, and then decide by crop as well. So each year, depending on what we're growing, we might change a little bit. But so that sounds daunting, and I'm going to walk through and try to make this a little less challenging. That's my goal. So we're going to have runoff mitigation points 0 to 9 is what EPA said they're going to have. So if you think about this, 9 is going to be the max points you need to accumulate for any given product. So that's something I'm going to walk us through. I think if we target that 9 points, we get all of our managed areas to that, then we don't have to worry about whatever herbicide comes on the landscape that we need to use. We have our 9 points, we have it documented, we have it where we can show it. The spray drift buffers for ground rigs are going to be from 0 to 230 foot. Again, depending on concern with injury or damage to endangered species or non-managed areas. These are going to start as products are registered or re-registered. We're already seeing new products come along. So first off, we're going to evaluate our fields being treated. Okay. So this is the checklist that if you pulled up that EPA mitigation menu and it says, do I need to implement these practices? So first off, so for a lot of these aren't going to fit for us. Okay. Does the treated field have a perimeter berm system? Most are going to be no. Is there an irrigation tailwater return system? Probably going to be no. Does the treated field have subsurface or tile drains installed with a water control structure and controlled outlet? For a lot of the Midwest, that's no. Maybe as you're getting into some of the southern states where you have rice production or you do try to control your moisture through your subsurface or tile drains, the answer might be yes. Okay. Is the application occurring as soil injection, tree injection, chemigation, or as a spot treatment less than 1,000 square feet? This could be yes in especially I think pasture and hayfield cases, right? We have a patch of perennial weeds or a patch that we're just trying to clean up. We might be spraying a small area. Is the field less than 1/10 of an acre, or are the areas within 1,000 feet down gradient from the treated field comprised entirely of managed areas? That would be other fields, roads, buildings, etc. If the answer is yes to any of these, we do not need to do runoff erosion measures. We don't have to do the mitigations. We don't have to do the tracking. Okay. So if you have a field, and I'm going to walk through this in a minute, but if you have a field and downslope 1,000 foot is another field or a pasture, right? You do not need to do mitigation on that field, the initial one. Okay. And that can include your neighbor's fields, that could include your farmyard, right? That's buildings, that's roads. If you're just doing a spot treatment, you do not have to do mitigation tracking. If you have that controlled outlet, again, you don't have to do tracking. So it's not going to apply to every field in every situation that we even need to track it. One tool we put together here at Iowa State to try to help, these are all different uh, tools we can use, right? The Point website, there's worksheets from the EPA. We put together something at soilscape.org here at ISU to try to basically walk us through that first step of a down gradient managed area. So if we go to soilscape.org, this is what pops up. You can see the whole state. This is just for Iowa right now, but we've discussed maybe doing this for other states if there's interest. If we do quick layer select, click on that, we get a pop-up and we would select herbicide strategy at the top, and there's this 1,000 foot stream buffer. What this does is puts a buffer on the streams in the state. For Iowa, that's going to be most of the natural or non-managed areas or areas of habitat for potential endangered species. Okay. So the other places in Iowa, there's some forests and there's some prairies. I feel like most people would know where those are at in relation to their fields, but just looking at this would give us a quick look. If we look here and zoom in a little bit to an area, we can kind of see the detail and where this 1,000 foot comes into play. So if your field is one of these that lands in this 1,000 foot buffer of this stream, we have to do mitigation tracking. We have to have our points, we have to add them up, we have to get to our point total needed for that herbicide. If we're in one of these fields over here, where we're outside of that 1,000 foot, from a natural area, okay, here we would not have to do mitigation tracking unless there was another non-managed area or natural area nearby. There is some situations in this, I picked this on purpose, where this stream, it shows up as a stream on the layer, but it's not highlighted with a buffer. Now, not all of these are continuously flowing streams. This might just be a ditch. It might be an ephemeral stream. It might just show up at certain times. So there still needs to be some ground truthing for you to figure out, is this something I need to buffer? Do I need to be doing mitigation tracking here as well? But kind of a quick take home and a win, if you're more than 1,000 feet from a natural or non-managed area, right? And it's just managed fields and areas around you, you do not need to track runoff erosion mitigation points. That's a successful win, right? But let's say you do have to do the tracking, or you just say, you know what? I'm going to track this because Wess Everman made it sound pretty simple. I like to do a lot of things by the KISS method, keep it simple. When it's me, I have two S's. For the larger group, we'll just keep it as one, right? But if we keep it simple, it makes life easier. So we can base these approaches off of relief points or tillage. And initially, I did this just based off of row crops. I put some examples together for this presentation on perennial crops as well. So in Iowa, we have different points based on runoff vulnerability within the state. So, for example, some counties you get 0 points. We have high vulnerability. Others we get 2 points. Um, again, this is based off of historical weather data, but and why one county versus the other? That's something with the modeling. But if you're in a county that gets 2 points, you get 2 points automatically out of those nine. Counties with zero, they got to come up with all nine in another method. So let's just start if we're looking at crops. Most of our farms, we're going to have some row crop, whether it's corn for forage or grain. You might be growing other row crops in rotation. But here's an example where we have a conservation tillage field in a county where we get our two mitigation relief points. Okay. And each of these are just some examples I kind of thought of off the top of my head or based off of my home farm in eastern Iowa, where it's pretty rolling, or different fields or farms I've seen through the years. These are points we might have, right? So right off the bat, if we're in a non-irrigated field, we get 3 points. So if you don't have irrigation, 3 points. If you have tile drains, again, this is without the control structure, but just tile drains, you get a point. By being no-till, 3 points. If you're strip till or min till, you're 2 points or 1 point, depending on level of residue. If you do contour farming or vegetative strips, right? If you have any topography, you get a couple points for each of those. If you have a grass waterway in that field, another 2 points. Okay. In this example, I hit 15 points. Remember, we only need nine. So you only need enough of these to hit your 9 points. That doesn't include a free point we get for doing mitigation tracking, doesn't include field adjacent mitigation, right? Filter strips, ditches, buffers. So we can hit nine pretty easy. Let's say we're worst case scenario in a row crop, conventional tillage, no relief points. Okay, we still get three for no irrigation, one for tile. We still can get points for our contour farming. Grass waterway or terrace is 2 points each, four if you have both. If you have a field border of vegetation, you get 1 point if it's 20 foot, 30 feet gives you 2 points. Okay, so we can hit, 9+ points fairly easily again. And again, that's not counting a point for mitigation tracking. If you use an expert for support, you get a point. If you have conservation programs, you can get 2 points or more, depending on what you're all doing in there. So there's a lot of ways we get our points without really changing much in the field. Now, well, and something else, once we get this, right, we put these together, we get our points, we save this in a file, and unless we change how we farm that field, our points are good in perpetuity, right? So if you hit 9 points and you say, I've got enough to cover as much as EPA would ever say, you should be good. We shouldn't have to go through this again. Again, unless you change and take out terraces or waterways or change how you farm that field. Um, so it keeps it simple. And I don't think I mentioned the 9 points. It's whichever product has the most points is what you have to reach. So it's not additive. If you have, let's say, three products in the tank and one is 4 points and one is 6 points and the other is 3 points, you just have to hit the 6 points. You don't have to add them up and get that many points. It's just whichever one is the highest. So the most we'd ever have to do is 9 under the current setup. All right. Moving on to pastures. Okay, so um, th just kind of thinking there are different mitigations we can have for soil types, sandy soils, low clay content, different slopes. We can get points for that type of stuff. Here in Iowa, especially where I grew up, pastures are always too steep to till, and so slope or they're going to be wet areas. Again, too wet to till or keep a crop. So I didn't throw those in here, but in other parts of the state or other parts of the country, that sand content, that slope, like if it's a fairly flat field, you can get points for those things as well. But again, non-irrigated, at least in most of the Midwest, unless you're out west, I don't know of irrigated pastures. Uh, we're conservation tillage. I looked into this. It's no till, right? So you can get 3 points for that. Contour farming, let's say we're strip cropping, maybe we have some strips in there. We could look at a couple points there. Cover crop or continuous ground cover, a perennial crop, counts as no-till for 3 points. If you take that out, um, once a year, then you can do like reduced tillage as well, where you lose a point, you go down to 2, and then if you put in let's say you put in grass every year for some reason, you'd go down to 1. But for most of our pasture, it'd be 3 points. Reduction in a portion of the field treated. So let's say I don't know many people that spray fence row to fence row in pasture. It's usually spot sprays for our weedy patches. Okay, so if you reduce the portion of the field you treat 30 to 60%, you get 3 points. If you happen to have tile in that area, you get a point. Again, I got up to 15 points in this scenario. We only need 9, so non-irrigated, no-till, continuous cover, give us 9 points. And again, you can get extra points for some other practices. Now, here's a alfalfa hay crop. Let's say we're in a county that gives us a couple points. Non-irrigated subsurface tile, like if you're in rotation, you might have tile in there. On my home farm, they still do strip cropping, alfalfa with the grain crop. So you get a couple points for that. We do on our home farm, we have vegetative strips on the really steep areas. So in that field, we would get points for that. If you happen to have terraces, you could get a couple points. If you have border vegetation, you get points. Again, I didn't even put in the perennial crop, the no-till. I didn't add all that in. So again, I think we hit 9 points pretty easy. To me, the bigger concern is our drift. I think that's where we're going to run into changes. is there's going to be language on the labels that give us our buffers up to 230 foot, wind speed maximums. The ones most recently released are 15 mile an hour wind. So can't be spraying when the wind's over 15 mile an hour. Droplet size, nozzles, boom heights are all going to be spelled out, mixtures, what type of spray platforms. So there's going to be a lot of things that we have to pay attention to and control. But we do have mitigations. So let's say the worst case scenario is 230 foot with a of a downwind buffer. What we can include in that are managed areas. So as far as EPA is concerned, we can consider other ag fields. So if we have corn next door or whatever other crop next door and we manage it, 230 foot of that can count in our spray buffer. Now, that doesn't mean go willy-nilly and drift on your neighbor's corn or his beans or whatever, but for as far as EPA is concerned, for endangered species safety, in a managed area, you're not likely to cause any damage. We can include roads, grassy areas, bare ground, field borders, hedgerows, and CRP. In areas where we are butted up against a natural area, we can get reductions based on how high we carry the boom and what type of droplets we have. So what we're trying to do is take that 230 foot and make it workable and manageable. So put together a scenario where we used a low boom with coarse droplets. We can reduce that buffer 75%. If we use a drift reduction agent, depending on what you're using, it ranges from 15 to 30%. In this case, I did a 30%. We can take that 230 foot buffer down to 0 feet, right? 75 and 30, we don't need to have a buffer if we're lowering our boom using coarse droplets and a drift reduction agent. Again, we shouldn't be getting that much drift if we're doing things right. There's other ways to do this, broadcast hooded or drop nozzles. Also, looking at the rate of the product, wind breaks, forest and shrubland, they all can influence that buffer that we have to take into account. So, the big things here, right? Read our label. Sorry, we want to be reading the label each time we buy a pesticide. Make sure we know what language has changed and what we need to be doing for mitigation, whether it's runoff erosion or drift. Think about the land we currently farm as well as the land we rent. We need to have discussions with the landowners and make sure we have a roadmap about how things are going to be, how those fields are going to be managed. If there's going to be changes, there needs to be discussions so you're not surprised. It, at the at the end of the day when you're spraying, right? And then follow any news about the ESA. So these labels are going to be continually updated. Look for any new statements. And like I said, there's new herbicides that'll be coming online with new labels pretty regularly. We're expecting 2 or 3 this spring. The land we own, right? What are our conservation practices we already do? Check for those PULAs on Bulletins Live 2. What field slope do you have? I didn't go into detail here, but if you're less than 3% slope, you get a lot of credit. You get points for that, right? Same for soil type. What's our runoff potential? And then what is the distance to critical habitats? That all determines, do we need points and what type of mitigations can we use? In Iowa, we rent a lot of farmland, and I get asked a lot, whose responsibility is it about all these points and mitigations? At the end of the day, it's the responsibility of the applicator to make sure he's following the label. That's part of getting licensed and making these applications. But my opinion is the applicator, the agronomist, the farmer, the landowner all need to be involved in this discussion so that We know what's going on, and really we should be sharing responsibility to make sure we're being good stewards at the end of the day. All right, my quick take home points. First, through all this, prepare for our unpredictable nature and prepare overall for, you know, implementing the herbicide strategy through our weather events. This runoff erosion, the drift comes from weather, right? And we can't predict it. So all we can do is try to plan for it. Basically, have good programs and plan ahead, understand our strategy. We have the tools and resources to be prepared and do a good job. So, at the end of the day, I think we'll be successful. It's just going to be some pain point of trying to figure this stuff out. Um, with that, I tried to leave plenty of time for questions and not just drone on too much. Hopefully, everybody's still awake after eating lunch and listening to me. But what questions do you guys have?
Thank you very much, Dr. Everman. A lot of good information here. We're a small group. If folks want to just unmute and go ahead and ask the question directly, they can do that, or they can enter it into the chat box. I'll give just a second if people want to unmute. Otherwise, we've had several questions come in. First one, confirm that the PULAs evaluate tax tank mixes of several chemistries.
Right now, unless it's changed really recently, the PULAs are all individual. So you have to look at every individual product you would use to see what the PULAs are. The last I saw for it, that was just 3 weeks ago, it was still just individual products. So you have to go, if you're going to spray 30 different products, you got to look at that 30 different times. You have to input everyone.
But they only have to total 9 points.
Oh, so yeah, okay. So the PULAs is the one thing. The mitigation is, yeah. So if it's runoff erosion, the max EPA has said that they expect to put on any label, any product is 9 points. So if we hit 9 points on every field and every piece of our farm, we should be able to apply any product. So yeah, and it's a whatever the max is what we have to do. It's not cumulative points. It's just if one product says you need 8 points, you need that. If all your products are 3 points or less, all you really need are the 3 points. So right now, the Liberty Ultra is the first herbicide that went through this. On the label, it says 3 points are required. So if you're in a county that gives you 2 points and you have tile, you reach your 3 points. If you're on non-irrigated land, you reach 3 points. So
Very good. We've talked Iowa, or you've talked Iowa, but this herbicide strategy, that's a nationwide program, correct?
yeah, so it's everywhere. I've just been talking specific to the to Iowa just because that's what I'm most familiar with. There, a lot of these would carry the same in another state. It's just each field or each scenario would be specific, as you go through those mitigations.
Very good. I just wanted to confirm that because we've got folks from several different states
Yep.
listening today. Um, I'm not seeing any other questions come in, so I'll keep going. Uh, as if I understand, location is a factor, obviously bodies of water, but what about things like schools, orchards, or beehives?
Yeah, so let's see. I think beehives would probably be different. That's not going to be in a managed area. That's going to be a sensitive area. Thinking to drift watch or the tracking site for that. We should be watching out for those other areas. Just anyway as general practice. So the guidelines with this is more where are there endangered species and do we need to protect them? And so when they talk about buildings and roads, lawns as managed areas that you can count in your buffer, they're not saying go ahead and drift on it. They're saying from a endangered species standpoint, that's what they're tasked with looking at. There are not likely to be endangered species in those managed areas, so they can be included in the buffer. So it doesn't absolve the applicator from from an investigation or being held liable if that pesticide drifts where it shouldn't go, like on a school, orchard, sensitive crop, beehives. But EPA would look at those as managed areas that, under the labeling and mitigation, wouldn't fall under the same umbrella. it it's kind of a nuance, but they're saying we're worried about endangered species. They're not going to get hurt in that orchard. But if you cause damage, you're going to be liable still.
Okay, very good. Good point to be made.
Yeah.
Now, I guess this is my question. Does the strategy include any, and for lack of a better term, I'll say police funding once violators have been identified?
No, there's no language around that. This is going to be state by state, right? So right now the state enforces, each state enforces the pesticide laws within their state. And so it'll be interesting to see how this gets handled going forward. I know with some of the drift that's been happening in row crops the last 8 years or so, 8, 9 years, there have been maybe some stiffer fines and some stiffer penalties for violating labels and drifting and causing non-target injury. As this gets implemented, I could see where there would be public pressure or there would be interest in adjusting the fees as well. But currently, there's no mandate within the herbicide strategy or any of the strategies.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Everman, for sharing the information and your insights on the EPA's final herbicide strategy. I'll remind everyone that this program has been recorded and will be available on the Four-State Extension Dairy Group website. Allow us 3 to 5 working days to make that happen. In addition, I will email you when it is available and include the link to the program evaluation. I'd like to thank everyone for their participation, and I look forward to seeing you at the webinar next month. I'll conclude by inviting everyone to help me celebrate Elmo's birthday. So you probably didn't realize what today's special event was. So thank you again. And at this point, I will go ahead and conclude this program.
Thanks.